I'm here today to talk to you about the idea of the clash of civilizations. And I'm doing that, first of all, because I have a personal interest in the issue. The relatives on my father's side of the family are all Jewish. On my mother's side of the family, they're all Christian. And on my wife's side of the family, they're all Muslim. Yes, you could say I've been sort of involved in a clash of civilizations my entire life. But actually, this is a sort of one of these hinge point questions, a crossroads moment that we're facing. We've heard all these fabulous stories about the possibilities that are ahead of us in our future, but how far and how fast we're able to progress with those will depend upon really how much support and resources have to go into fighting this conflict, fighting this war. So this idea of a clash of civilizations is one that I've really devoted my career to. For the last 10 years as a documentary filmmaker, making a number of documentaries having to do with Muslims and Islam, for everything from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, the rise and fall of Islamic Spain, to a public opinion poll about what Muslims around the world think today. And in getting the invitation to come here and speak, I thought at first that maybe I would be showing you some clips or some excerpts from those films. But I decided instead to provide for you, from at least my perspective, as someone who has been working in this field for a long time, traveled around the world, speaking in many audiences, a report to all of you on kind of where things are on this topic of the clash of civilizations. Do we have reasons to feel optimistic or reasons to feel worried? So to begin my talk, I always like to start my speeches on this topic with a joke that I heard some years ago when I attended a conference on this topic, on the clash of civilizations. And it was a conference, a lot of people came up, made all kinds of speeches. But in the last plenary session, a rabbi stood up and he told this joke. And for me, it kind of galvanized and put together really the issue that this was all about. And so I always like to share the joke saying that if you remember nothing else from my talk, if you remember at least the punchline from this joke, you'll be, I think, have a bit of a handle on the issue. And the joke the rabbi told goes like this. It takes place in the Middle Ages in Rome at a time when the Jewish community and the Catholic community aren't getting along. So the Pope calls in the head rabbi, and he says, "I think it's best that the Jews would just leave Rome." The rabbi says, "Okay, let me make a deal with you. Let's have a theological debate, you and me. If I should win, we get to stay. If I should lose, we'll leave without a fight." Pope says, "Okay, but under one condition. This debate has to happen non-verbally. No talking allowed in this debate." Of course, weird terms for a debate, but the rabbi's in no position to refuse, so he accepts. And of course, this becomes a very big deal. They have to build a stage in the middle of one of the piazzas in Rome, and thousands of people arrive on the day of the debate. The Pope comes up on one side, the rabbi comes up on the other, and the debate begins. First, the Pope puts up 3 fingers like this. Without a moment's hesitation, the rabbi puts up 1. The Pope nods thoughtfully. Clearly, he's impressed. He makes a gesture like this over his head. Again, without a moment's hesitation, the rabbi points firmly to the ground. Once more, the Pope nods, and he reaches behind himself on a table where he's brought the communion wafer and wine, and he holds it for the rabbi to see. Now, for the first time, the rabbi seems stumped. Thinks for a moment, reaches into his cloak, and he pulls out an apple. At which point, the Pope says, "The debate's over. The rabbi wins. The Jews can stay in Rome." Down the stage he goes, immediately surrounded by the cardinals and bishops. They say, "What was this about?" The Pope said, "Oh, it was a fascinating debate. First, I put up 3 fingers like this to signify the Trinity. And the rabbi raised 1 to remind me that we share one God in common. So I made a gesture like this over my head to say that God sits in his majesty in the heavens above. The rabbi pointed to the ground, reminding me of God's on earth, watching and judging. So I took out the wine and the bread to signify redemption. And he pulled out the apple to remind me of the sin of Adam, which we all share in common." Now, the same conversation was happening to the rabbi and his followers. And the rabbi said, "Yeah, it was a really weird debate. First, the Pope put up 3 fingers to say the Jews had to leave Rome in 3 days. I said, not one of us is going to go. Then he got frustrated and said, no, the Jews have to leave Rome. I said, we're staying right where we are. And then the weirdest part of all, he took out his lunch. So I took out mine. I like that joke. Because it really has an important message, and what the punchline is trying to tell us about the clash of civilizations is this. We may not be facing so much a clash of civilizations as we are facing a clash of misunderstandings. I mean, think about it for a second. Let's take the joke serious for a moment. The Pope was putting up 3 fingers that clearly signify to him a central, theological, beautiful concept in Christianity, the idea of the Trinity, right? But the rabbi is seeing only a sinister and threatening message in those same 3 fingers. And so it is when we are often interacting with the other. We misinterpret each other's symbols. We misinterpret each other's stories or histories from their point of view. And that often leads to conflict that actually does become a clash of civilizations. So, you know, the idea is then, of course, well, why don't we just try to understand each other better? Let's learn more. And that's sort of a trite, obvious but trite conclusion, because the point of the matter is, it's really hard to accomplish. You know, we often don't think about the other before there's a conflict. I mean, how many people were thinking very much about Muslims or Islam before 9/11? And then when a conflict or event happens, when we need that understanding the most, it is most difficult for us to obtain. So around the time that 9/11 happened, our organization, a nonprofit called Unity Productions Foundation, began making documentary films on the topics of Muslims and Islam. We 2 years ago launched a project called 20,000 Dialogues, which uses those films in dialogues and discussions around the world and across the country. So far, we've had 15,000 dialogues involving 85,000 people. And what I've learned is that we were making one of our most recent films. When we were making one of our most recent films, it was called Inside Islam, What a Billion Muslims Really Think. And what we were trying to do with that film, and there are copies out there for anybody who wants to get them for free. What we were trying to do with that film is really ask some of the questions that came up in the aftermath of 9/11. Mainly, you know, is there actually a clash? Do they hate us for our freedoms? What do Muslims actually believe, particularly Arab Muslim world, believe about things like democracy, gender equality, so on and so forth? And the really amazing thing was we based the documentary on a Gallup poll that was taken from the years 2002 to 2007 in the Muslim world entirely, but focusing on the Arab Muslim world. And there were really some amazing findings that that poll came up with. Some of it was not surprising, like, for example, that the Iraq War was extremely unpopular. But some of it was very surprising. The poll found, for example, that on the continuum of very religious to irreligious, the more religious a person was likely to be, the less likely they were to say killing civilians or suicide attacks were justified or correct. Something that seems a little counterintuitive. We also found that there was a great amount of desire for democracy, freedom, gender equality, all these Western values that we ascribe to. But the point remained, and sort of in giving you this report, even though we made this documentary, we put it out there, the thing was, where do we see it on the ground? Well, as you all know, on January 25th, we did see the idea of all this on the ground. When in, whoop, there we go, whoop, wrong one, there we go. When Egyptians came out over an 18-day period and peacefully stood up against a 30-year-long dictator, Hosni Mubarak, and won democracy, or at least the beginnings of that. They affirmed for the world that the Arab Muslim world does want democracy, does have the same values that many of them, which we share, and which was evident a few days ago when the Egyptians went out and voted for a referendum on a new constitution, which, if you saw it, included many things that were modeled after the US system, like, for example, two presidential terms of 4 years. So we see that not only do they not hate us for our freedoms, but they want our freedoms and are striving to achieve them. This is a Berlin Wall falling moment. And part of my report to you is to say that I believe, without question, that in the next couple of years, and there are going to be setbacks for sure on the road to this, but just as what happened in Eastern Europe, without question, we are going to see a democratic Muslim Arab world in the near future. So the idea that there is a clash of values is, I think, being a bit removed from the table. The second thing that was accomplished in Tahrir Square is, I believe, the main source of the conflict that we've been involved in, Al-Qaeda, was completely discredited on that day. As you probably know, the Egyptian Ayman al-Zawahiri, second in command in Al-Qaeda, always had, as part of his plan, I mean, his goal was really overthrowing the hated Mubarak regime. That was what he was out to try to do. And what he was really doing, and what Al-Qaeda has been doing in these years, they were trying to present a model for political change, a model based on the experience in the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. You know, we can take on a superpower, we can sort of bleed them enough that they leave, and then we're able to come into the country and overtake it. That was the model that he was presenting. But what for, after 18 years of mayhem and war and violence and the dislocation of millions of people, the deaths of so many, what he wasn't able to accomplish in 18 years, the Egyptian people accomplished in 18 days. It's an absolute game changer. It will never be the same again. The war on terrorism has taken finally its turn towards the end. And we're going to see it happening, I believe, as these ideas spread across the Middle East as they are today. And while I'm at it, let me add one point. Since this is a session on leadership and we're focusing on women leaders, the success of what happened in Egypt can be ascribed to, you know, as they say, success has many fathers. And it can be ascribed to many people who legitimately went out there and took risks to make things happen. But the success in Egypt also had many mothers. And one of the leading people is this woman by the name of Asma Mahfouz, who actually and arguably is the person who actually launched this revolution. She had gone into Tahrir Square a few days earlier after seeing what was going on in Tunisia. She had brought with her some signs with a few of her friends saying, "Why not democracy here?" Immediately, she had been surrounded by secret police who harassed her, assaulted her and her friends, and threatened her. She went back to her apartment, where instead of just sort of giving up, she decided to make an appeal to the Egyptian people, which she posted on YouTube, put into a Facebook, and sent out. That Facebook message, and as we know now, social media played a huge role in this. That Facebook message went around the Egyptian world and started the revolution. So the person, one of the people who you could say not only was world-shaping and world-changing in Egypt, but also really showing the power of social media to overcome dictators, is this young woman, 26-year-old Asma Mahfouz. So we see now a different face. So in those two instances at least, we have something positive to hope on to. The negative, though, is that we still see across the country and in many places sort of you know, a remnant of concern that is coming and stemming from the fact that we've had in the last year, couple years, attempts on this soil of various terrorist activities. And see, the terrorists prey on this. They know that by themselves they don't have the power, but if they can do spectacular things, they can try to achieve a clash of civilizations which they themselves do not have, you know, the strength or the power to achieve. So the underwear bomber, I mean, why pick that idea of striking on Christmas Day? Because it knows that would hit in the hearts. The Times Square guy, why pick Times Square? For that same reason. Unfortunately, these acts have created again sort of a dialectic of a clash of civilizations happening here and even in this country. And what we hear now, it's phrased in the terms of, you know, Muslims don't stand up against the terrorists. Moderate Muslims do not do enough. Now, besides that, I could talk on that subject for a long time, and besides the fact that, we have many examples, including, for example, the person who foiled a Times Square bomber, who was a Muslim vendor who saw something suspicious happening and alerted authorities and arguably helped avert that tragedy. I think the easiest way to address that question is, just go online and Google Muslims against terrorism. I did that yesterday morning in preparation for this speech and did a screenshot. And what you see comes up as 850 in this particular moment, 840,000 references of speeches and talks and marches and things that happen, things going on where Muslims are taking a stand against terrorism. And I also urge you to think about this. Almost every morning in our newspapers we read about a bombing that has killed civilians in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Pakistan. And keep in mind, the people who are bombing these folks are the terrorists, Al-Qaeda people, who are trying to target those who do not want to practice the religion that the way they want it to be practiced, or targeting people who are just simply trying to live their lives apart from the rules that these people want to impose on them. They are also on the front line. So when we hear that Muslims are not doing enough to combat terrorism, I urge you also to think of those people and to remember that this is not a us versus them situation, Muslims against the West or something like that. But what really is the issue is we have a committed group of murderers against the whole world. So in my travels and in my work, that is what I've kind of come up to, that there's actually a great deal of reason for optimism right now. We see changes happening that really hope to avert a clash, but there still are these tensions that all of us need to take some role in trying to address, even if it's only in our own hearts and how we reflect upon them. Going back to the joke just for a minute, when we were doing one of our documentaries on the rise and fall of Islamic Spain, one of the things that we learned was that actually when things were starting to fall apart, because this was a society that rose with the good relationship between Christians, Muslims, and Jews, created the golden age for the Muslims, the golden age for the Jews, laid down the foundations of the Renaissance, but fell apart when all those conflicts and the clash began to grow. And it turns out that these kinds of theological debates upon which I told the joke actually happened. And while they happened, the way it usually worked was the rabbi was set up to lose. Because the argument was to show that Judaism couldn't possibly be right. And if the rabbi should happen to win, it was either disregarded or he might find himself arrested or even killed. The idea being that when we're in this moment of a clash, we have to make the effort to really look and try our best to understand. It's not easy. Our motto is e pluribus unum, out of many one. Pluralism is the nature of our country, but we have to work hard to get it. As Dr. Martin Luther King used to say, darkness can never drive away darkness. The only thing that can do that is the light. Thank you very much.